Hello and welcome to the second step of our 8-step system, and that is forecasting future demand or forecasting your future sales. This is going to be a bit of a lengthy video because I need to go through several concepts with you that perhaps you've never seen or heard before, and I want to make sure that you're completely up to speed and on the same chapter with me as we continue from this video forward. So this is a foundational video. Take your time. I'm going to explain things to you in the language of mathematics. And now, if math has never been a strong suit for you, or it's been a long time since you took a math class or did any math at all, don't worry. I'm going to take care of you. I'm here to make sure that you totally understand this, because part of inventory management and forecasting sales and doing the things of an inventory manager requires some math skills. Now, having said that, I want to assure you, and I say this whenever I'm on stage or any podcast I ever do, is that God gave us mathematics. Bill Gates gave us Excel. So you don't have to become a working mathematician. You don't have to do these numbers yourselves. But what you need to know is how this works. You need to conceptually understand how forecasting works. And that's not a big deal. So I wanted to start this module with a little bit of a disclaimer on what it's about, but also to tell you this. You got this. I'm with you. I understand this stuff, and I can teach it to you. And if you still are struggling with it, please contact me, michael@inventoryboss.com. You can get a hold of me, and we'll set up a Zoom call, and I will help you if you're stuck. I want you to win. And so we're going to start this video with that in mind. I want you to win. I'm going to do everything I can to make you proficient at this. And I believe that at the end of this video, you're going to think, wow, I can totally do this. So having said all that, let's start talking about forecasting future demand. Now, the first thing we need to do when we're looking at making an order for future sales, for a future sales period, is to determine what sales trends we have from our own historical data. And so, of course, we're going to need to gather some data. And once we get our data, we need to look at it to see if we need to make any manual adjustments for past events. And that could be something as simple as we had sales, we had maybe some coupon strategies for volume and ranking, marketing, whatever. Maybe you ran out of inventory. That's something you need to know because that's going to skew your data. And so we need to look at the things that might artificially inflate or deflate the sales numbers of a particular period, because we're going to use our historical sales data to determine what our future sales will be. So our data has to be good. And if we need to make any adjustments because of certain events, like I mentioned, then we need to make those adjustments before we apply any math. Think of it this way. Before we bake the cake, we need to make sure that we have all the right ingredients and the right measure of ingredients. Otherwise, the cake's not going to turn out the way we want it. So before we bake the numbers into our cake, we want to make sure that the numbers are good. And a quick example is running out of stock would provide a lower sales figure for a given month, while Amazon's Prime Days, typically in July, would provide a higher set of sales for a month. But that doesn't indicate what our sales trends are. But if we don't adjust for these values, then we might skew our numbers and our forecasts one way or the other, and we don't want that. The next thing we need to do after adjusting for past events is to apply some math formulas to our historical sales data, so then we can see what the trends are. But before we do that, let's formally introduce and define some of the terms and concepts we'll be using throughout this module and throughout the balance of the course. So some quick forecasting terms. A forecast period. A forecast period is a specific span of time described by a forecast quantity. Basically, a forecast period is a month. For example, if I forecast a demand for 2,000 units a month for the next 6 months, then each separate month is a forecast period. The next one's a forecast interval. A forecast interval is a length of time that each period is based on. So a forecast period could be a week, a month, a quarter. We are going to use months, and I'll explain that in a little bit later. But a forecast interval, we're going to have forecast intervals that are monthly. And then there's a forecast horizon, and it's simply the period that your forecast covers. So, for example, if today is May 1st, and I've calculated a forecast for each month through December, then my forecast horizon, May through December, is 8 months. My forecast interval is 1 month. And April's forecast would be a specific forecast period, right? Not a big deal. And just so that we make sure that this gets kind of cemented in your mind, let's do something fun and have a word problem. Like I said, we're doing math this module, so nothing screams math like word problems. So here's our first word problem. I'm approaching the point where I need to order more products so I don't run out of inventory and lose my ranking or even my bestseller badge on the Amazon platform. I have multiple products listed in 4 different e-commerce platforms, limited capital, and I have bills to pay. So I'm forced to limit my forecast horizon to 7 months. My forecast interval is 1 month. So I need to calculate the proper amount of inventory to purchase that will cover 7 forecast periods. Make sense? Simple. Now, to do all that, I'll simply look back at recent sales data that covers the last several forecast periods, determine if there is a trend in sales, be sure to smooth out any noise from the numbers, like I said, events that could adversely skew my calculations, make adjustments for any of those prior events, then account for any upcoming events that may occur during the forecast horizon. Now, that could be coupon sales, it could be Black Friday, it could be Prime Day, it could be whatever you want. Then factor into the forecast any seasonality adjustments that need to be made during the forecast horizon. So is this forecast horizon covering Christmas, the summer season, depending on what products you sell, in order to account for any known change in demand? Now that's what we're doing. And we're breaking it down. We're parsing this into particular terms, and we're going to use those particular terms throughout this conversation. I wanted you to see how these are used in context, so it just makes it easier. Now, factors in our forecasting calculations are, again, math-driven. And this is where we're going to get into the math, but like I said, it's not a big deal. We have a program that handles all this. The Inventory Boss system has all of these programs built in and a little bit of AI to do some of the more difficult calculations that are really amazing. So the heavy lifting is going to be done for you, okay? But you do need to understand what that heavy lifting is. So here we go. Number 1, trends. A trend is a gradual increase or decrease in demand over a period. Now, I know intuitively that makes sense to you, but let's just define it anyways. Noise is simply the unpredictable variation in demand. Sometimes you have good days, sometimes bad days. You don't know why, and that also goes to months. Sometimes you have good months, bad months. Doesn't mean that your business is falling apart. It's just there's noise. It's the unexplained spikes or dips in sales that can give you inaccurate signals as to an increase or decrease in the demand. Now, the math is going to smooth out the noise, and I'm going to show you an image in a minute that's going to make a lot of sense to you for noise cancellation. Events. We talked about events. So these can be any number of different things. Coupon sales, running out of inventory, price change, Prime Days, Black Friday. Remember, running out of inventory when you have plenty of capital is kind of an unforced error. You should have your reorder point calculations completely nailed and figured out so that doesn't happen to you. Seasonality. Now, seasonality is intuitively something you understand, but it's actually a mathematical equation. It describes the fluctuations in demand that repeat over time during certain times of the year. Now, Christmas is the big one, but if you sell camping gear, then summer is your big time. If you sell ski equipment, then winter is also your season outside of Christmas. January, February, you'll still be making some good sales. So seasonality isn't just about holidays. It's about the time of year as it relates to the category of product you're selling. So what this means is we'll need to analyze the past sales data, do some averaging to smooth out the noise or events, factor in seasonality, possibly make some manual adjustments, and then make an order. It's intuitively very simple, but we're going to use some mathematics to make it more precise. Now, before we get into any of the math, I want to go over some basic parameters of our forecasting method. In all of our examples, in fact, all of our forecasts, we're going to use months as our forecast intervals. One reason is that e-commerce platforms like Amazon measures many of their fees in periods of months, monthly storage fees, etc. And so that's what we're going to use. It makes forecasting a lot easier and far more consistent over time. Monthly intervals are also most closely related to an e-commerce seller's business for many reasons, including the fact that 90% of us are third-party sellers. We're not the manufacturers, meaning that we're at the end point of the production line and are selling private label goods or finished goods that we didn't manufacture. A lot of sellers are just stamping their brand on it and selling it as their own products. And since we can't control the point of production, it's just far more easy to use months as our forecast interval. And again, like I said, we're not at the end point of production, meaning that most, if not all, sellers can't shorten the supply chain because they don't control the manufacturing process of the finished goods that they sell. Now, when you rely on a manufacturer, often in another country, you really have no control on the ability to streamline the timeline of their supply chain or where they buy their products and whatnot. So we're approaching this not as a manufacturing facility, but as a third-party seller that's purchasing finished goods to sell in the marketplace. So a lot of people ask me, why do we use monthly intervals? And these are the reasons. And so we're going to stick with that. I'm going to teach you based on monthly intervals, and our program works on monthly intervals. And as I said a minute ago, here's the graph I wanted you to see in terms of noise. Our initial goal is to smooth out the noise. Let's say this is a given month, and your sales, they seem to hover around 15,000 units, maybe 100 units. These are just example numbers. But you can see from the graph that you have great sales, but we need to smooth out all these peaks and dips into a averaged amount of sales. So that's what the math is that we're doing. I wanted to give you a visual for what you're about to learn in terms of moving averages and exponential smoothing, things that sound kind of complicated, but what they're really doing is this. They're creating a red line out of that blue craziness, and we're smoothing out the data so that we can manage it and forecast with it. You can't forecast off the blue line. That's just nuts. But the red line, we can. And so our goal in our forecasting models is to smooth out the data, get rid of the noise, so that we have the ability to make a coherent and very accurate sales forecast. So let's focus for a second on the trend, events, and seasonality and how we're going to approach these. The goal in our forecast is to look for trends in our sales data. We're going to smooth out the noise as much as possible, adjust for some events, and then factor in seasonality. So we've talked about all that already. Now, after that, we're going to correct for measurable errors. I'll explain that later. And then add in some extra goodies that I'll talk about later. But for now, let's stick to the basics of making a simple forecast. The math involved at this stage is basically a series of averages that we hope will correctly account for sales trends. Remove any outlier figures that could skew our averages, the noise, and end up with a good guesstimation of future demand. And yes, I did say guesstimation because that's what we're dealing with. What I'm showing you is spreadsheet math. Spreadsheet math is perfect, pristine, exact math, which is amazing when you're doing math. It has to be that way. But the real world is not perfect, pristine. It's messy, right? And so in the real world, when it comes to forecasting, we're doing our best to guesstimate the best, but we're being smart about our guesstimation. This is the end result of what we're doing here. It's impossible to create a perfectly accurate forecast. I mean, we can't even perfectly forecast the weather more than 2 to 3 weeks out. And what we're doing as e-commerce sellers is trying to forecast the sales of our products months and months and months and months in advance. And so it's not going to be perfect, but we're going to get it as refined and as accurate as possible. And so to get that close, we need to have some sort of algorithm or system. And that's what our 8 steps are for, to bring order to the chaos of having lots of different products that have different selling seasons. So here's some of the math we're going to figure out. Simple moving averages, weighted moving averages, exponential smoothing. We're going to build a seasonality index. Remember, I told you seasonality is intuitive, but it's actually a math formula. It's really simple. And we're going to learn when to order and how much to order. But what we're going to do now is just a few things. We're going to talk about simple moving averages. We're going to end this video with one of these under our belt, the simple moving average. Now, if you remember being in high school or junior high and thinking, I'm never going to use this stuff. Why do they teach this stuff to us? Well, that day has arrived. We're going to do some math, and it's going to start right now. We're going to start with the very basic, simple moving average. All of our forecasting efforts, all of them, are only trying to answer a single question. How many units will I likely sell during the next period? So if we know what we did in month 1 through month 6, you can see the sales trend there. If you're really sharp, you can see the event that took place in one of those months. And then we're only trying to solve for the next month. That's all we're doing right now. We're going to test different non-scary math formulas to guesstimate the sales demand for month 7. That's what we're doing. It's not voodoo. It's not anything crazy. It's just we're trying to figure out what the next month is going to be. So we're going to start, like I said, with the simple math. Let's average some values. Let's take 333, 233, and 322. How would you average that? Well, there's different ways to do that, actually, because math is cool. We can take those 3 numbers, add them up, and divide by the number of numbers. So 333 plus 233 plus 322 divided by 3 turns out to be 888 divided by 3, which is 296. Now, the great thing about mathematics is that you can express the same operation in different ways, and that makes math really cool. So let's look at another example. We can do 333 plus 233 plus 322 multiplied by 1/3. Now, 1/3 is 0.333, so that gives us 296. Look at that, the same result. So one more way to express the average of these 3 values is this. we're going to take each one and multiply it by 0.333 and then add them all together. Now with some rounding, because we have several decimals out, guess what we get? 296. So here I've shown you 3 different ways that we can do the same thing, averaging 3 different numbers and come up with the same value. We're going to stick with the highlighted method. So let's look at this. We have 333 times 0.333 plus 233 times 0.333 plus 322 times 0.333. Add them all together. 111 plus 78 plus 107 is 296. This is what we're going to start with. And that might sound confusing, but it's going to be really simple on the next slide, so let's get there as fast as we can. How does a simple moving average predict future sales? Because that's what we're doing. We're just averaging numbers, and we're going to average them in a moving average, which means every time we get a new monthly sales figure, we're going to drop one off the end and add the new one and average those. That makes it a moving average. A simple moving average calculates the average sales volume or demand over a fixed period of time relative to the date the forecast is generated. So we want the most recent data we can get because, again, we're talking about our current trends. In this example you're about to see, we averaged 3 months of prior sales in a rolling 3-week, well, it should be 3-month, moving average. So let's take a look at that. Month 1, 2, and 3, these numbers should be familiar to you, is 333 plus 233 plus 322 divided by 3. Again, you know the numbers, 296 units. So we have forecasted for month 4, 296 units, and that's totally off because they did about 100 units more than that. But let's just stick with this for a minute. Next, we're going to fill in the rest of the sales in the forecast row with the simple moving average. So I'm going to bring my cursor in here to kind of show you what we're doing. These 3 months here average to this value. We got a new month, so we're going to average these 3 months and get this value. Now we have a new month, so we closed out another month, so we're going to average these 3 to get to this value. Now this is a rolling average, so once we get month 6 in here, we're going to take these 3 numbers and get this value. So we've solved for X. Month 7, we're projecting 554. Now we're still lagging. We're going to talk about lagging in another video, but this is conceptually how a 3-period simple moving average works. And that's going to do it for this video. We're ending on the simple 3-period moving average. This was hopefully simple math for you. We're taking 3 periods and we're averaging to a single number. And then when we've advanced 1 month, we get the new sales information from the prior month. We drop off one of the months and then we average these 3 to get this value. When we have this month value coming in, we drop off that one, average these 3, and come up with this value. When month 6 rolls around, and we're cranking here. I mean, look at our sales. They've doubled, right? Then we take this month here, this month, and this month, knock that off, and we average these 3 and come up with this value, forecasting for this period, right? This is the simple moving average. It's a 3-period simple moving average, and it's one of 3 different ways to forecast, and that's what we're doing. And so that's going to bring this video to a close. We've covered a lot of information. If you need to go through this video again, not a problem. If after you finish this module, like I said, and that's just not coming together for you, I want you to send me an email, michael@inventoryboss.com, and we'll arrange for a Zoom call, and I'll make sure that you get this 100% because I want you to win, okay? I really do. So this was the heavy lift of this module. You learned a lot of terms, you learned some math, and we're going to move forward now into the next video where we talk about the weighted moving average, the 3-period weighted moving average. It's a little bit more complex than the simple moving average, as you can imagine. And so I'll see you in the next video, and we'll go over the weighted moving average. Thanks for watching. Inventory Boss helps e-commerce sellers increase profitability by balancing their business through solid inventory management best practices. Visit inventoryboss.com today and get all of our training and the use of our cloud-based software for an initial price of only $10 for the first 30 days. Get started today.